네, 그럼 크루즈 세션 다시 시작하도록 하겠습니다.
Now we are going to begin the panel discussion session, and for that we would like to invite the Professor Cheng Jue once again to the stage. Professor Chen, can you please come up to the stage? So now the presentations are over, and we will now have the panel discussion session. So I would like to invite the three discussants for the session. And these three discussants are the, let's say, indispensable figures in the cruise industry and from Korea. And in fact, the Professor Cheng Juehao of the Shanghai Maritime University was supposed to join, but because of some personal reason, he could not join us today. So we would like to invite the three commentators from Korea, as well as the three speakers for the panel discussion session. And for our online participants, if you leave your questions on the chat window, then we will come back to you and give you the reply later. So I would like to invite the discussants to the stage now. Please come forward. Let me briefly introduce to you our discussant. The first one is the Mr. Sung Nak-ju, Director of the Maritime Finance Division of the Korea Ocean Business Corporation. Director Sung, he's true expert in ship finance. So he will be giving us the expert opinion on the ship finance that Korea is critically, desperately needed. Next is the Yoon Ju, Associate Research Fellow of Korea Culture and Tourism Institute. And she will be talking about the reality of the cruise industry and all the challenges that we are going to face. Next is the Chun Jun-chul, Manager of the Marine Leisure Tourism Division at the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. So as a representative of the government, he will be talking about various challenges that the cruise industry is now facing today and what kind of government support will be available and will be devised in the future. So once again, I would like to thank the discussants for taking their time. Why don't you give them a round of applause before we begin? Now, in the order that I introduced, so starting from Mr. Sung, we would like to hear their comments. Good morning. I am from the Korea Ocean Business Corporation, KOBC. It has been around 4 years since its establishment. However, our mission was to promote the shipping industry and also enhance capacity of the shipping industry, in particular in terms of finance. And therefore, in our division, we have engaged in various projects despite relatively short history. And when it comes to cruise industry, I was not really that knowledgeable, especially before coming to this forum. And the Mr. Hwang, the presenter, says that the cruise industry has its unique characteristics, and I completely agree with this. So the KOBC, we deal with various types of the vessels, and we don't really have the absolute criteria that we provide the finance for certain ships, but not for the other ships. We don't really have such classification. So we provide the financial support not just to large carriers but also small carriers, as well as the special bulk ships and so on. But for cruise ships, actually it was the last year that I heard about that. But then I found that there is no operator being involved. So in order to provide finance, there must be the business operator, and also the details should be worked on, like whether it will only travel in the shores or will go out to the outer sea. and so on. But there are no operators yet, and also it's not really clear what kind of cruise ships will be built with what scale. So depending on the scales of the cruise ships, the things will be very different. So of course, if there are some practical and detailed plans for the cruise ship development, then of course I believe that the public finance organizations and also organizations like ours will be involved in the discussion, and we will take this issue seriously. But because currently we don't really have the specific plan, and as you know, the cruise industry, to build the cruise ships, it's really, really expensive. So in the sense, not a single financial institution can afford this huge cost. So as you can see from the Japan's case, the 29 regional banks were involved. And so in that sense, I think that we really need the participation by multiple financial institutions. And also because it involves a huge cost, so the lending period should be on the long-term basis. And so we also have to find out the financial institution that can provide such long-term lending. Another aspect that we should take into consideration is that we build the cruise ships. So we can build cruise ships domestically inside nation or outside, like in Germany. So Europe, if you build the ships in Germany, then you can actually rely on ECM that supports the export of the components and equipment that go into ships. So for example, like in Korea, if the equipment manufacturers make an export of their products overseas, that would provide ECM finance for support. And according to what Mr. Tanaka said, when the ship is built in Germany, the Hermes or the Coface of France, they are the ECM organization that provide project financing. And therefore, and also their credit rating is very high as a public government finance institution. And so depending on where the ship is built, whether it's domestic production or the overseas production, terms of loans will be different. And also the structure of the investment. So again, I think that this will create the conditions for financing. And also the details that we have to work on is that first of all, we have to have some business feasibility, and by theory, because we are the risk-taking industry, so the first thing that we take into consideration is the credit rating of the operators, as well as their history and experience. And secondly, we also have to look at the profitability, so the routes, we analyze them. As you know, the profitability and business feasibility of the cruise industry are very diverse, and it also involves diverse industries, including casino and so on. So we have to have very extensive assessment. And also the finance institutions, we need the collateral or pledge. And so likewise, the cruise industry, we also have to understand the value of the collateral and how they can be changed. So these are the things that we take into consideration to come up with the appropriate financing terms. But anyway, I believe that there must be some detailed plan produced first. Then I think based on that plan, we can work on and try to come up with a solution together with the other policy institutions, finance institutions.
Thank you very much. Well, the organizer specifically asked us to take off your mask. You will not be fined and you will not be penalized for not wearing a mask anymore. And the presenters, if there is any comment or question regarding the comment raised by the panelist, if there is anything relevant for your presentation, or if there is anything you can help or advise, please let us know toward the end of this panel discussion. We will give the floor back to you toward the end of the panel discussion. Now I'd like to invite Yoon Ju, Associate Research Fellow of Korea Culture and Tourism Institute. Hello, I'm Yoon Ju. Well, thank you very much for the insightful presentations. Since I'm working for the Tourism Institute, as I listened to the presentation by Mr. Ted Blamy, I could see that you have such an insight into the current cruise market. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation, Mr. Ted Blamy, once again. Whether it's Korean or the Asian market, after the pandemic, the global cruise market has demonstrated significant changes, and there are several points I'd like to highlight. One of that is that post-pandemic cruise vessels have introduced various measures in order to respond to any pandemic or any health risks. And there has been such an upgrade when it comes to that, a swift response and the response capability. And the expression used by Mr. Ted Blamy was redesign. So I could see that the cruise industry and the cruise vessels have been built up. So like the North American market or the European market, they have coming back to normal. It's not just about recovery. They are attracting new to cruise tourists. So we have such a huge demand in the pipeline. However, as you mentioned, especially in Northeast Asia, the situation is not that rosy. This is due to the zero COVID policy in mainland China. But for Korea, we have not reached any maturity when it comes to the cruise industry in Korea. And we had the thought-related implications and COVID. Well, in the absence of those two incidents, then we would have grown our cruise industry quite dramatically. So we still do not know what to do for sure, whether there will be government-led investment or private sector-led investment. So the Korean market itself is not really open to international tourism or cruise tourism. Well, international tourism has reached a point of maturity, but when it comes to the cruise tourism, the Korean people are not really open to that. I think soon we will have a Director General from the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries and to share with us what we are going to do when it comes to the cruise industry. Of course, the Korean ports have been open to the entry of foreign flag vessels, but I was told that there would be no entry of Japanese vessels from next year onward. We are preparing ourselves, but we do not have any vessels entering the Korean waters. I believe cruise is a supplier-led market. If this is a capacity-led market, then what should we do? I believe we see the clear need for the Korean flag vessels. I think the Korean cruise market is very small. Nevertheless, if we have the Korean flag cruise line, that will serve as a pivotal point and catalyst for the development of the Korean cruise market. Well, the case in Japan is quite different from that of Japan. Well, Japan has its own national flag cruise industry, and its source market is quite huge. I know, it would be too much for Korea to have its own flag line for the cruise industry because the source market is very small. Actually, several years ago, we conducted our internal survey as to the outlook for the Korean and the demand for the cruise tourism. There was a potential demand was 180,000 to 200,000 potential customers or the tourists who would like to go on a cruise. So if we have such a potential, then we should have a vessel and cruise. If we want to create a route with Busan as a home port, and we would see some limitations up to Russia, then we would go all the way up to Vladivostok and toward the north, the south. We can go only as far as Taiwan. You mentioned the Korean cruise market, and you mentioned also that we should develop some Korean customized cultural services. And one thing we have to take into consideration further is that since I think since the demand for the neighboring markets is huge, I think most of international tourists they go to the Asian market because of the affordable airfare. But cruise cannot be compared to this. But it's really affordable. It is really value for money. But people do not know that. So with that money, then we will use the LCC low-cost carriers, and I will spend several days in the Asian countries. But people do not know. People are not aware of that. So that means we have to develop a route where LCCs cannot take you to. There is a promotion and advertising as to the cruise, but it is quite limited. There is no experts. When I try to get some advice from a travel agency, I could not see any expertise. So we need to nurture experts offering that cruise is really value for money. It is really affordable. So based on that created a domestic demand, and with the Korean national flag cruise, then we will be able to grow the outbound market. This is the end of my comment. Thank you.
자, 마지막으로 우리
Last but not least, we would like to listen to the manager Cheng Juehao of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. I am Cheng Juehao from the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, and as a person who is in charge of the policy making for the cruise industry, I will just give you some broad overview as well as the government policy direction for the next 5 to 10 years down the road. As you may be aware, in February of 2020, that was the most shocking period for the Korea's cruise industry, because in the Princess vessel, there was an outbreak of the COVID-19, and that actually compromised the reputation of the cruise industry very severely. And Korea completely shut the border and didn't allow any cruise ships to get inside. But then we reopened the market. So there was some sort of the period for the temporary shutdown of the cruise industry. So in the past, we thought that the cruise industry is flourishing, but then we realized that we heavily relied on the inbound only. So our industry structure was one side tilted, and therefore we didn't really have the cruise ships, and we didn't really have our own foundation for the cruise industry. And therefore, if there are cruise ships coming from overseas, then we can have the flourishing business. But if there are no vessels coming in, then we cannot have any cruise industry at all. So the COVID crisis actually served us as a wake-up call that exposed the vulnerabilities of the Korean industry, and the Korean government realized that we have to cultivate not just the inbound industry but also outbound industry, and for this we have to have the flagship for the cruise industry, and we have to establish the conditions for that, as well as provide finance and support for shipbuilding. And as a mechanism for that, we are now talking about the building of the new cruise ships, but Korean government, we don't really have the immediate plan right now because it's enormously expensive. But if the new vessel cannot be built, then maybe we can import the second-hand ships to have and create the outbound market. So I think that as for the short-term measures, it is more likely to have the let's say the used vessels, import that and change it to the Korean vessel. And then we can have some small-scale operation based with these vessels. Then gradually we can expand that and move to the phase where we can build our own vessels. So for this, we have come up with the 5-year plan that promotes the inbound and outbound tour programs. So as for the inbound, yes, we have a lot of projects, but for outbound, our goal is to establish the national carrier for cruise industry, and for this we will cooperate with the relevant organizations. So whether we purchase the ships that are already built or whether we are going to build our own ships, anyway, the ministry has this goal for cultivating the outbound industry, and we'll continue to work on that. And we ask for your support as well. And thank you very much.
네.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the practical approach here. Rather than building a new cruise vessel, we can purchase a second-hand vessel for the nascent Korean cruise industry. That was the discussion by panelists. Now I'd like to turn to our speakers for their comment. And if there is any question from the online participants, then I would like to ask the speakers to address those questions. Following the order of the presentation, I'd like to turn first to Mr. Ted Blamy for his comment. Please.
Thank you, Professor. By the way, I wish to apologize sincerely. I had a very detailed PowerPoint with all the points I was making in my presentation, illustrated with tables and charts and everything else, which hopefully would have been very helpful. And unfortunately, apparently it did not show up on the screen. So this is a great shame. Anyway, I hope you could understand what I was saying without the PowerPoint that was driving all my comments and showing the detail. I was very interested in the comments by the panelists. And two in particular, this idea of starting a new cruise industry out of Korea is a very strong one and a very exciting one. And indeed, second-hand ships are probably an inexpensive, by comparison, inexpensive way to do this, because there are second-hand ships, high-quality ships, built to last for many more years that can be available on the market from time to time. And all that would need to be done is for the finance to be found to purchase one of these, significantly cheaper than the cost of building a new ship. And as a way to start the business, there's no reason why that can't be entirely satisfactory. It's not as if these ships are used up. They've just been used before, but they are quality ships. Indeed, during the pandemic, we saw, I think, Carnival Corporation alone remove some 20 ships from its fleet or more. I can't remember the precise number. So I recommend that that be considered before the building of a new ship by Mr. Jun and the MOF. The other thing I'd like to mention is a comment by Ms. Young about how the low-cost carriers are taking people to places already. And that's totally true for the Korean outbound market, which is a very healthy and active outbound travel market. But let's not forget that a cruise experience is entirely different to traveling on a plane, renting a hotel or rental car, trying to find your way around and everything else. The cruise is an entirely packaged vacation. It's not just the destinations that make it glamorous and exciting and fun. It's the onboard experience. It's the fact that you have no hassles. You only embark on your ship. You never have to pack and repack, unpack, repack. You don't have to go through customs and immigration procedures to go from one country to another. And there's an enormous range of exciting things to do on board the ship. Some people don't even get off the ship. Of course, we think they should, but so those two things, I think, the comments I would make about the excellent comments from our fine panelists.
Thank you. Thank you. 예, 여러분들 뭐 통역을 통해서
So I'm sure that you have heard that already through the translation, so I'm not going to translate that. And now the Tanaka Saburo, can you also comment on that? Mr. Tanaka? So I am Tanaka Saburo.
クルーズに関わって、かなり長くなってきたわけ
It's been such a while since I joined the cruise industry, and the same holds true for Japan. And as for the cruise industry as a whole, one important pillar is tourism, and the other important pillar is a ship and vessel, and another pillar is port. There are three elements we have to take into consideration: tourism, vessel, and a port. These three elements achieve harmony for the cruise industry. This is what I feel when it comes to the cruise industry. We have to have an in-depth understanding as to these three different elements. And as for the upstream, that it would be the building of a ship or construction of an infrastructure or a port. And as for the midstream, we have an operating company. That's the process we'd go through. And moving on to operation of a cruise, in order to sell the cruise product, you need to have a network. So as an industry, there is a huge stream. Upstream is a stream and downstream. So you should have a holistic approach in order to further develop the Korean cruise industry and identify areas of focus for you. This is what I thought as I listened to the comments of the three panelists. The same goes true for Japan. At first, Japan focused on outbound. The Japanese cruise industry started back in 1989. And how to get Japanese on board. So, to that end, the plan was formulated in order to build a Japanese flag cruise line and Japanese cruise vessel. So, while the market has become stabilized, and we were intrigued by the development of the Chinese cruise industry. Since 2010, we have many Chinese cruise lines coming in, and from then on, we started to focus on inbound cruise tourism. I think, it might be reversed for the Chinese cruise industry, but you need to have a very strong and robust outbound market. Otherwise, you cannot sustain the cruise industry only with the inbound cruise market. So, in that sense, the 5-year plan, I truly root for that. And I hope to see the everlasting development of the Korean cruise industry. Thank you.
네, 대단히 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Last, I would like to turn to Dr. Hwang Jin-hee for his comment.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. So, all the speakers and discussants, I agree basically with what they say. And regarding the manager Cheng Jue comment, as well as mentioned by Ted Blamey, I think that purchasing the existing cruise ship can be a very practical, viable solution as a first step. And also the KOBC, aside from the newly built ships, maybe for the purchasing of the existing ships, if they can provide the appropriate financing, then I will be able to see pretty promising results. And also we have a long-term development plan for the cruise industry. And one of the goals under this plan is to promote outbound market, which is very significant. So we hope that we can promote the balanced growth of the inbound and outbound growth for the proper growth of the cruise industry in Korea. And also regarding the Mr. Sung's comment, yes, I agree with what he said, especially the KOBC for the cruise ships. I hope that they can create opportunities in a very proactive manner. And also he actually gave us a very positive view. So I believe that together with the ministry's plan, their plan will also create some synergy effects. And also the Yunju from the KCTI, she mentioned the need to create a new market, and based on that, tourist market. And based on that, we can actually create some minimum demand for the sustaining of the cruise industry. And I, again, agree with this. And then Mr. Tanaka Saburo gave us a very good examples for Japan, which was very insightful for Korea. And the Ted Blemmy, I was just surprised about his knowledge. How can he be so knowledgeable about the Korean market, although he does not live in Korea? So I really learned a lot. And last time I actually met in person in Jeju Island, and I was delighted to hear his presentation. So in order for these proposals to come into being, I believe that we have to really deepen our understanding in the cruise industry, and the government should pay attention. But I think what's required is that the promotion should not be just for the sake of promotion, rather promotion should be led to the changes in perceptions, which will be led to the investment and also a lot of policy support. And in that sense, I think that the large-scale events are important, but at the same time, we have to have a small scale, let's say breakfast seminars that invite the opinion leaders of the region and locality. I think these will be a very good tools for promotion. Or for example, like for tourist agencies or university students, we can also have some small-scale competition or events that promote their understanding. So again, I think that the future is very promising, as we heard many good plans as well as the good case examples. So I'm very honored to be with you today. Thank you very much. So we don't have the questions from our online participants.
크루즈 시장은
The Asian cruise market, I believe, is the most critical market for the next generation and for the future. I believe today's session will serve Korea and the cruise industry to further develop in order to lead the global cruise industry. I think the same holds true for any industries. We started small, but our end we will be prosperous. At the end of the day, I think this will be what we are going to experience for the cruise industry. Thank you very much for staying with us till the end of today's session. Please give another round of big applause to our panelists as well as the speakers. Thank you very much.